Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's live broadcast, Understanding Emotional Intelligence, Actionable Strategies to Improve Your Leadership Performance. I am Judy O'Rourke of LabRoots, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. We are delighted to bring you this educational webinar presented by LabRoots and sponsored by an education grant from Lab Leaders. Lab Leaders is Roche's promise to empower laboratories and the people within them. This is accomplished by providing clinical and strategic insights, support, and solutions from the industry's top innovators via lableaders.com, the 2016 Lab Leaders webinar series, and through L2 Summits, our Lab Leaders live events. We have a few important announcements before we begin. This webcast is designed to be interactive, and we encourage you to ask questions during the event. You can submit questions by typing them in the Q&A box, which can be found by clicking on the green Q&A button at the lower left of the presentation window. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can. You can enlarge the slide window by clicking on the screen icon in the lower right-hand corner of the slide window. If you have any technical problems viewing or hearing this presentation, please click on the support button at the top right of your presentation window or submit your problem through the green Q&A button lower left. This webinar has been approved for continuing educational credits. Please click on the CE button at the bottom left corner and follow the process to receive your credits. I would now like to introduce today's speaker, Calvin Geyer. Calvin Geyer is a certified coach and developed his unique frame of reference through his military service working on highly complex engineering projects and as a certified financial planner working with high net worth families and business owners. Calvin earned a Master of Science in Electrical Engineering from Wright State University and received his formal coach training through the Institute for Professional Excellence in Coaching. He became a certified coach in 2013. I will now turn it over to Calvin Geyer for his presentation.
Thank you, Judy, and just want to welcome everybody. And I was taking a look at the map and just of who's on the call. We've got somebody in, looks like Istanbul, Turkey, a number of people in Europe, throughout the United States, Central America and South America, and Canada. So welcome, and again, thank you to LabRoots and Roche for creating this great platform to promote leadership in the laboratory community. And I also want to extend a thank you to Mayo Medical Laboratory for hosting me today as I go through this webinar. And I have a number of lab folks from Mayo Medical Lab in the room with me today. And so let's get started. Let's take a journey and learn a little bit about emotional intelligence. Sort of what is it? Sometimes it's referred to as EQ or EI. And so some of this is, what does EQ look like in real life? And from a business perspective, why should I even be interested in using EQ? And no webinar is really complete unless you really have some tools to take away. So I want to give you a couple of tools today, some things you can go right back to your work area and your personal professional life, put them to use, and start practicing and developing your EQ. And then I'm going to give you a challenge at the end, a small $45 challenge, a good stocking stuffer for this time of year, something that you can take away and work on maybe over the holidays. So, but before I switch a slide and really go into this, I'd like to pose a question. This is sort of a rhetorical question, but I really want you to get you thinking, but how ready are you, how warmed up are you to take an active part in your own personal and professional leadership development? So think about that for a moment. We all have a set of mental models that we use to process information, make decisions, and interact with others. And some of that information that you'll be exposed to today is going to change your mental model. And the things that you're exposed to on your leadership journeys change your mental models. And what I would like you to do is be open to those challenges. And believe me, I know I was when and throughout my leadership journey. So here we go. So this gives us the first opportunity to at least take a look at who's on the call and give you the ability to interact with the system a little bit. So if you're by yourself in a room, you know, where do you fit in this on this scale? Are you an individual contributor, a frontline manager? Do you manage managers, or do you have some other role in the laboratory? And for those in a conference room, if you would sort of look around the room and give us an input on who's there. And I'll just give you a few seconds to take this poll, and then we'll close it out and look at the results. So this gives us some practice, because I got 4 or 5 more of these interactive pieces through here, through the webinar, and this just helps us get rolling. So we're going to see the results here in a second. So we have a good mix. Some people that have other duties in the lab, a lot of first-line managers, that's good. Manager and managers, and some individual contributors. So there, now you have a sort of an opportunity to see how this polling works and how we're going to use it going forward. So thank you for participating, and let's get rolling. So I'd like to start with a quote by this author, Hiram Smith, and it's whenever there's a gap between what you value and what you are doing, you are in pain. So think about that for a minute. We're really all creatures of emotions at some point or another, even the most ardent scientists among us, even as an engineer myself, and we feel the pull to be in sync with what we value most in our lives, and when we're out of balance with those values, like when we don't respond correctly to others, when we make poor decisions, or when we fail on a project, that causes pain. And so Smith, in his book, he defines these 3 gaps as the beliefs gap, the values gap, and the time gap. And the beliefs gap is just the gap between what we believe in, the behaviors that lead us to meet our needs, or the beliefs that don't lead us to meet our needs. The values gap is the gap between what we value most in life and where we invest our time and energy. And the time gap is the gap between what we plan to do each day and what we actually get done. And so keep those gaps in mind as we move through this realm of emotional intelligence. So I want to start with our first model. I like models. Models really help provide some context around relationships between various concepts. And you use models in your laboratory every day, in your everyday setting, and how you process work, interpret results, or even make decisions. So here's a model that we're going to use to help us understand emotions. This model comes from Dr. Robert Plutchik, and so you'll see on here that there are 8 what we'll call base emotions, and then there are the other emotions from that. So there's these bipolar pairs, we'll call them. So if you look at on the chart, joy and sadness are across from each other. Anticipation and surprise are across from each other. Those emotions in the middle ring are, like I said, the base emotions. The higher energy form of those emotions are found at the center. For example, the high energy form of anger would be rage. And from this model, you can also see that the low energy form of anger is annoyance. And those emotions that are combinations of the base emotions are shown between the petals. So for example, the combination between joy and anticipation would be optimism. And having models like this really help us create a language to understand the gap between where we are and where we want to be. And sometimes being in the angry state is a good thing. It's not the emotion that's the bad or the emotion that causes the problem. It's the reaction or action from the emotion and what we display while we're in that state that really helps us define our emotional intelligence. So here's a great example of what emotional intelligence isn't. anybody that's watched The Big Bang Theory on TV, at least those of us in the United States, know that Sheldon has extremely low emotional intelligence and really is unaware of sort of how he impacts other people. So here's another opportunity for us to interact, and I'd like you to read the question. So which part of our communication contributes to 55% of the message? So if you would, vote between words, tone of voice, or body language. This original research come from a scientist by the name of Morabian, and I really don't want to belittle his work, or to put it in light context, but I do want to drive a point home here on really what the answer to this is. And as soon as we close the poll out, we'll see. So body language, tone of voice, and words. So let's see. The right answer, of course, is body language. Now, in today's world and our social media, we use a lot of written words, even in the laboratory environment, emailing back and forth and sending documents. And sometimes those messages are limited to 140 characters. And in an email or letter, we miss the tone of voice and we miss the body language completely. Sometimes you can pick up on tone of voice. Did they use caps? What was their word choice? There are a number of things to help you there, but you completely miss the body language in an electronic message. And the message that you meant to be conveyed was not always conveyed, and the emotional response, both yours and theirs, might be at odds. And so I would encourage you to look at how this happens in your laboratory environment and when a face-to-face conversation may result in a better outcome as opposed to just using words to convey a message. So what is this elusive concept of emotional intelligence? Well, Dr. Stein has written a great definition, in my opinion, and it's specified as the emotional and social skills that collectively establish how we perceive. Now remember, go back to Plutchik's wheel of emotion. So how we perceive those emotions, and then how we also express ourselves, how we develop and maintain social relationships, and these are relationships both inside the work environment and outside the work environment, and then how we cope with challenges and stressors in life. And stress plays a significant part in how emotional intelligence shows up in the way we react. And I'm going to be doing a breakout session at Knowledge Lab in the spring on stress and its effect on EQ. And finally, how we use the emotional information that comes at us in an effective manner to properly influence people in a meaningful way. So that's our definition of emotional intelligence. So here's another model. So Reuven Bar-On, another highly respected practitioner in the field, has really given us a very rich, very robust model. And much like the body of knowledge that you use in the laboratory manager space, this model has 5 domains, and those domains are self-perception, self-expression, interpersonal, decision-making, and stress management. And then underneath each one of those domains are 3 subscales. And these 15 subscales and 5 domains give us the complete model for emotional intelligence. One of the researchers in the field Stephen Stein, and I'll provide you with another resource of his later on in the webinar, has added this other dimension called happiness. And essentially he takes the subscales of self-regard, optimism, self-actualization, and interpersonal relationships and creates this sort of happiness factor. It's how do I feel and how satisfied am I with life. He's also developed an assessment, one that I use in much of my professional practice, to measure each one of these domains and subscales. And the assessment's been validated with rigorous study, and the results are normed against various population sets. And what this does is it gives us the ability now to compare results from one person to another, and as we'll see later on in the webinar, the ability to use the assessment for selection and promotion. Now, this is a fairly complicated and rigorous model, and so Dr. Stein's come up with another one that really fits well in workshops and also gives you the ability to learn a little bit more about emotional intelligence without having a complicated model to do so. And I use this model a lot in workshops, and I'll also be using it at Knowledge Lab at the pre-conference workshop and going into extensive detail about each one of these different areas. Perceiving and managing, so how I perceive my emotions, mine and others, how I manage those emotions, and then how I use my abilities to make decisions, achieve goals, and influence others in a meaningful way. As leaders in the laboratory, you're often given the role of leading change, and sometimes those changes are small and sometimes they're large. And having a good handle on how you make decisions and achieve these goals and enroll others in the process are vital to identifying the gaps and building a plan to help you close those gaps and become better leaders. And I'll provide you with a couple of resources later in the webinar on how you can introduce your team and yourself to this model. So now we've got two validated normed models that help give us some ideas of the kinds of elements that make up emotional intelligence. But these are some things that emotional intelligence is not. It is not cognitive intelligence. It's not IQ, and it's not aptitude. It doesn't predict somebody's vocational interests or even their personality, and it really doesn't tell about how somebody will achieve, although it can be used as a selection criteria to determine whether or not somebody will be successful in certain environments. So now, here's what I want to do. I want to put EQ in action. So the work that Dr. Stein, Baron, and others have done was really focused on self-assessment, me looking at myself, answering a set of questions on how I perceive myself and my abilities in EQ. There's another set of researchers out there by the name of they're Drs. Mayer, Salivoy, and Caruso, and they've created a set of assessments that really help people understand how they put EQ into action in their personal and professional lives. And so in the next set of slides, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some facial expressions, and you'll be asked to decide. Now, it's a multiple choice questions. You'll be asked to decide what emotion the person is exhibiting. So be ready to make a selection. For those in groups, just get a consensus and make that selection. And the faster we can get through these, we can move through this process. But I really want you to focus on the person's face, understand what the emotion is, and make a selection. So here's the first one. This individual showing fear, interest, surprise, or compassion. You'll see a resource in a moment. I'm going to run through 3 facial expressions, but there's a website, and I'll give you the web address on this website, and there's 21 facial expressions that you can run through with your team or individually. And again, it's just a tool to help you get better at understanding what somebody might be conveying to you with body language. So are we ready to close this poll? All right. We have a lot of very smart people on the line. And you're correct. It is surprise. So again, if you go to the website, you'll see it down there at the bottom, greatergood.berkeley. I can't read that on my slide, but you can read this web link here and go to that web link. And again, there's 21 of these. We're going to go through 2 more of them. So here the eyebrows are raised and the individual opens his mouth and drops his jaw. So that is surprise. Here's another one. Is this sadness, shame, disgust, or contempt? I hope I didn't pick out all the easy ones for everybody in the group. Okay, poll's closed. Here are the results. All right, so now this one might have been a little more difficult for people. So we've got contempt is the number 1 choice, and disgust is the next choice. So let's see what was contempt. So these aren't easy. And we deal with people every single day, and we look at their facial expressions, and we make judgments and reactions based on these body language indicators. And sometimes we get those indicators wrong. And when we make a reaction or a judgment on that and reflect that back to the individual, sometimes things escalate out of control. So let's try one more. Is this facial expression desire, embarrassment, flirtatiousness, or love? This one might be too easy. Everybody in the room got this one right. Again, I'd encourage you to go to the website and take a look at all 21 of these facial expressions and run through that with your team. It's just a great exercise and just understanding how you see things and how they see things. So coming up with the poll results, the majority show flirtatiousness, which is actually correct. But again, still we see that there are those that miss the indicators. And it's kind of crazy. We see facial expressions every day, and sometimes we don't pick these up. One of the things I like to do in my workshops is to actually get people to physically do the expression shown on the slide on their own face. And when they do that, and you might try this if you're sitting in a conference room or even by yourself, try that, and you actually be able to then begin to feel what that expression is, and more often than not, you'll get the answer correct. Thank you again for your participation. So why does all this EQ stuff really matter, right? And how could it impact the efficiency and production of a laboratory? And while I don't have any studies that directly relate to the lab, I will show you 2 longitudinal studies using EQ that resulted in significant performance improvement and cost savings, and then we can draw some parallels to really any environment, especially the laboratory environment. So here's the first one. The Air Force was seeing a significant dropout rate. 82% of the people that entered their pararescue jump school did not graduate. This was not only a huge monetary cost because, one, the school's expensive. They moved people across the country and located them at the site of the school, so there's costs associated to do that. But then you have the added cost of having the individual fail, and that's not good for morale. So they undertook a study, Dr. Stein and others, using the EQI assessment and a rigorous process, and they looked at successful and unsuccessful candidates. And what they found was that the candidates with these 5 listed subscales, flexibility, optimism, self-regard, happiness, and reality testing, those that were high in those subscales were more likely to graduate than those that were low in those subscales. They subsequently changed the way they were selecting candidates for pararescue jump school, and those changes saved about $190 million a year in training costs because they increased the success rate. They also had similar results, although not nearly from a dollar perspective. They had similar results when they used EQ to select recruiters. They were having a lot of recruiters that would fail, men and women. They would select them. They were great candidates. They'd put them in these locales to work with high school students to recruit them into the military, and they'd have high failure rates. They went back, did the same thing, took a look at what EQ scales, and they were different EQ scales than these, and they began selecting recruiters based on emotional intelligence, and again, the success rate of recruiters went up, and the number of recruiters that failed to meet goal went down. Here's another one from a sales organization. American Express has been using EQ for a number of years, and in their pilot study, they took a group of financial advisors, sent them through some EQ training, and provided them some ongoing coaching on EQ, and they increased their sales revenue by 18%, more than the control group, which had no EQ training at all. They also took a group of managers and gave just the managers EQ training and compared that against another group of managers that got no training, and they saw an 11% increase in revenue just because the manager received some emotional intelligence training and coaching. And so these are just 3 examples, I guess 2 for the Air Force that I showed you, but using EQ for selection, and then the other one using EQ for performance improvement. And where emotional intelligence of the individual was enhanced, and productivity and cost savings followed. So many labs have roles very similar to this, where individuals market and sell services to other hospitals and clinics, your outreach programs. And my question to you is, how would EQ training and or using selection impact your lab? And then how could you use EQ in developing leadership, similar to what American Express did with their regional managers? So So I promised a few tools. So we've really seen two tools already. We've seen Plutchik's wheel. That's a tool to help sort of put a name on an emotion. We looked at the facial expressions tool. That's another one that helps us, sort of physically understand how I can use emotional intelligence and develop the hard skill set of understanding people's facial expressions. But here are two more tools I'd like to introduce you to. The first one comes from Marc Brackett. And this will be a mnemonic, and the mnemonic will spell out the word ruler. Marc Brackett he's a researcher at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence and does a lot of work in the school systems with teachers, students, administrators, etc. So the first R in our mnemonic of ruler is recognize. So now go back again, use Plutchik's wheel. So now you have that tool there. So recognize the emotion and feelings in yourself and others. We want to understand the cause of those emotions. Am I afraid? Does it conflict with my values? Am I under stress? Am I concerned about something? Where does that emotion come from? So understanding the emotion. Then we label the emotion. So one of the things that Marc Brackett says is if you can name it, you can tame it. And the reason that labeling is so important is because your emotion comes from sort of the reptilian side of your brain, and in order for us to put a word or a label on the emotion, I have to use the prefrontal cortex. I have to use my thinking brain. And the moment I start using my thinking brain, I can now more easily control my emotions. Then express it. There's nothing wrong with expressing emotion. Anger, joy, it doesn't matter. We should all express those emotions. We just need to do it in a healthy manner and not do it in a manner that creates more conflict. And lastly, regulate. So when we know we're in a position, and anger is not a bad thing. Joy is not always a good thing. And so when we're in a position where we feel emotion, we've labeled it, now we need to be able to regulate it both in ourselves and others. And what I mean by that is think about how many times, and we've all done this, I'm guilty of this for sure, where you've seen a reaction in somebody, probably a negative reaction in somebody, and you intentionally push the button again. Right? So you don't help them regulate it, you keep pushing the button. I don't know, maybe sometimes it does feel good, I get it. But now using this mnemonic with ruler, the last one being regulate my emotion, and I'm going to help the other person regulate their emotion. You can watch Dr. Brackett's TEDx video. It's the TEDx Golden Gate presentation. It's easily findable on YouTube and definitely well worth watching, as well as some of the research that he does in EQ, well worth reading. So here's another one, and this comes from somebody right here in Rochester, Minnesota at the Mayo Clinic, Dr. Amit Sood. And he wrote a book called The Mayo Clinic Guide to Stress-Free Living, and I got to see Dr. Sood do a presentation a while back, and this is one thing I really took away from it, and I not only presented in workshops, I try to do this on a daily basis for myself. So it's 3 steps. So the first step is just about gratitude. So take the first 90 seconds of your day, maybe before you get out of bed, and just think about 5 things that you're just grateful for. Could be that you got a warm house to wake up in. It could be you've got breakfast. It could be that you've got a job to go to, or you're meeting a friend today. All those things are gratitude. So just spend 90 seconds and say, what am I grateful for? The next thing is novelty. So novelty is those things that are sort of interesting in life that we may not always notice. And one of the things that Dr. Sood says in his talk is, let's say you're eating lunch with a colleague or a friend, and you're focused on your conversation with them, but out of the corner of your eye, you see this person that you went to college with, and you haven't seen him in 20 years. Where does your attention go? Your attention goes to the novelty, to the person that you haven't seen for 20 years, and you want to interact with them. So for 30 seconds every day, find a piece of artwork in the building that you reside in, or stop along the way to and from work and notice something that you've never noticed before and spend some time with it. We all have cell phone cameras, or most of us have a camera on our cell phone, and I like to take pictures and with my camera and document things along the way during the day. And the last one is, and I think this one is really important, is to make a commitment. Take 3 minutes before you walk into your house at the end of a long day and just understand that you want to be genuinely interested in the people with whom you're going to interact. This 3-minute respite allows us to get rid of the stress hormones, the cortisol and the other stress hormones in our body, and let the oxytocin come in. That's often referred to as the love hormone. And we excrete this hormone when we smile, when we shake hands, when we hug. And so you're just trying to relax yourself and know that you want to be genuinely interested in the people with whom you're going to interact with. So there you have it, 5 minutes every day, and you can increase your emotional intelligence. So I promised a challenge, and here's the challenge. Here are 2 resources. The book on the right, The EQ Edge, Emotional Intelligence and Your Success, written by Dr. Stein, really dives into Reuven Bar-On's model for emotional intelligence, goes through every one of the subscales, every one of the domains, provides you some practical examples to strengthen in those areas, as well as how low and high emotional intelligence in each one of those areas shows up in the work environment. And the other one is the Emotional Intelligence Skills Assessment, which is that second model that I showed you from Dr. Stein. And this workbook's available, and these are available online. So it's $22 for the workbook, $20 for the text. But the workbook is a sort of a self-paced guide. You can go through it, take the assessment. There's some work in there. You can do it with your teams. You can do it by yourself. And between these two items, you can now set yourself up for 2017 by setting some goals. So here's a sheet that I use. So oftentimes in a workshop, I'll run people through the EISA assessment. We'll get their scores. We'll go through all 5 of those domains, and then pick out 2 or 3 that they want to take action on. And so when you do this, you look at goals. I use we've seen SMART goals. So SMART being simple, motivating, achievable, realistic, and trackable. So simple. So those 5 things on the EISA are fairly simple. So pick some things out. Motivating. The goal has to motivate you. If it's motivating somebody else and you're not motivated to do it, then you're really not going to accomplish the goal. It's really got to be attainable, so it's got to be within your reach. I say relevant or realistic. Relevant in that, how do you link it to your job performance, or how do you link it to something in your personal life? So make it relevant, i.e. if I accomplish this goal, then here's something in my work life or my professional life or my personal life that's going to get better. And then trackable. Maybe trackable could be using an assessment. Trackable could be that you've read a book, you've gone through some exercises, you do Dr. Sood's challenge every day for a month. It's something like that where it's trackable and you're accomplishing it. So there you have it. That's emotional intelligence. I want to thank you for participating in the webinar and for Roche and LabRoots for giving me this forum, and for Mayo Clinic for hosting me today. And reflect back on using the tools that you have at your disposal, reading about it, and participating in leadership development. So if I could, I will open it up for questions, and you'll see that there might be a way for people to type questions in.
Yes, indeed. And also want to let the audience know that if you are interested in the link Calvin mentioned, it will be on your screen shortly. And thank you, Calvin, for that informative presentation. Before we get started on the question and answer session, I would like to remind our audience how to submit questions. You can submit questions by typing them in the Q&A box, which can be found by clicking on the green Q&A button at the lower left of the presentation window. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can. And our first question is, what areas do you see as getting the most leverage from emotional intelligence?
Probably the number one area is really how you see yourself, this whole realm of self-perception. And even if I can do very well at making decisions, I'm technically capable, I can gather information and make decisions, or I drive through challenges. If I don't see myself in a good light, it's very difficult for me to see others in a good light, and for me to really rise to my level of capability. And in a lot of the so in the book, in the book for Dr. Stein, what you'll see is in the back there are some job descriptions or career fields, and then the top 5 emotional intelligence subscales that they have found to be relevant for those particular career fields. And what you'll find is almost all of them, how I perceive myself, one of those 3 subscales under self-perception, are going to be drivers in those professions.
The next is, how can we apply EI methods for group management?
Well, I think every group's going to be a little bit different. So I'm working with a group right now where they've all taken the emotional intelligence assessment. Now we're going to look at what this particular group does, what their role is within the broader organization, and boil down to 4 or 5 EQ subscales that are important for them to get their job done, and how they see their role in the organization. And then from that, each person then can now develop their plan, because now you know what's relevant. So what's relevant to the organization might be these 5 subscales. You might be strong in 1, 2, 3, or all 5 of those subscales. And so now you can put a plan together to move yourself from where you are to making a bigger impact on the organization by just focusing on 2 or 3 out of the 15 subscales. So that's how I would use it in a group setting.
Why does personality not contribute to EQ? Certain personality types are more extroverted or intuitive, feeling, and that could lend to more social experience, allowing them to have a higher EQ. Absolutely.
And if you look on one of the subscales, for example, is empathy. And clearly different personalities, different people are going to have different ways that they deal with people and situations. One of the assessments I use, it's very similar to, so it's like Myers-Briggs, but I use another one called DISC. It's a 4-quadrant assessment. And you can find people in every one of those quadrants that can be jerks or that can be highly effective regardless of how they come across, their personality. So we've all worked with people that are, high dominant driver personalities that, again, can come off to be a jerk or could be very compassionate in the way they drive people and get the job done. So yes, personality plays part of a role, and it can be an influential piece of it. But when you overlay emotional intelligence on there, I believe, and my work shows that that even people that have caustic personalities can change by focusing on these 15 subscales of EQ.
Is there any correlation or matrix relations of EI with Hofstede-Trompenaar structures?
I am not familiar with that. So I would not know how to answer the question.
All righty, let's move on to the next. How does intuition come into play with emotional intelligence?
Well, so interpersonal domain, so intuition you could get a feeling about somebody, and that feeling could be right or wrong. You could make a judgment that may not totally be factual, but if you're intuitive about the way you can connect with somebody, clearly it's a positive for emotional intelligence. Again, it's I've seen results from people that are hardcore scientists that still have an empathetic reaction, that can still relate to people, that don't and they have high EQ in some areas. Again, these subscales. So when you take the larger assessment, the EQI 2.0, and you get rated in each one of the 15 subscales and 5 domains, you're going to rate high in some and low in others, and then there's going to be an interplay. And oftentimes we will use a strength to make up for a weakness. So if I'm not empathetic, for example, I might use a different subscale that I'm strong in to make people believe I'm empathetic or to try to be empathetic.
What is the secret of EI for dealing with different cultures?
Yeah, and then this is, not only are we dealing with different cultures, now we have 4 or 5 generations in the workforce, right? So we've got a global workforce, and we have a workforce that's highly diverse in age. And I think the secret, if you really want to know the secret is talking about it. The secret is having workshops, doing these assessments, putting a plan of action together, talking to people in different cultures or with different perspectives, and understand where they're coming from and why they come from that perspective, and knowing that it can be a strength for them in the team and the organization.
How can we read people through a conference call? We use remote meetings a lot.
That's a tough one, and that's even in this format. So I'm sitting here in a room. I've got 4 or 5 other lab people in the room with me. I can get some reaction from what I'm saying by watching them, but you're right, on a conference call it's very difficult. You miss a piece of it. You can get tone of voice and words, but you can't get body language. You can think about my body language. And now video is becoming such an easy medium today with high-speed internet access, and I mean, here, look at this webinar. I mean, there's somebody in Istanbul, Turkey, and there's somebody in San Diego on the call. So, I mean, we can bring people together from all over the world. We could also do it in video. Now, with this many people on the call, it's difficult to do with video, but for smaller engagements, I use and I encourage people to use video, so you get all of those pieces in that wheel to fill out the communication.
Gaps in labs, like when we do things faster than we would like because of deadlines, do cause pain in personnel. As a manager, how can I best acknowledge this pain without removing it? I can't change the deadline.
I think you keyed in on the right word there, and that's acknowledgement. In coaching, it's not about necessarily changing a feeling, but everybody wants to be acknowledged. So acknowledge that there are feelings, acknowledge that people are under stress, and then just work with them to get around it. Again, I mean, stress is a big piece of emotional intelligence. What happens is that when you're under stress, all those good things that you do, the ruler and looking at people's facial expression and counting to 10 and biting your tongue, I mean, all those things, when we're under stress, they all go to the wayside, and we have these default reactions. And so, again, a lot of it is helping people understand how they can strengthen those places where they're not so strong. I hate to use the word weak, but strengthen those places where they're not so strong. And then adapt those other places where they have strengths and call on those strengths when they need them.
Body language is 55% of communication, but the study was done in 1971. Do you think it has changed, especially with so much digital communication happening?
It may be, and I don't want to overplay the work that Moravian did on body language. And what he did was he gave people a word, and he asked them for a reaction, and there's a lot that goes into it. But think about your communication when you're texting somebody or when you're writing an email, and how often the actual message got lost. I mean, you can transmit numbers and sometimes concepts, but until you're having a conversation with somebody and really face to face, I think just one of the earlier callers said, we're on conference calls a lot, but we're not looking at people. You can't see if people are rolling their eyes on a conference call. And you can't see if people are doing other things when you're on a conference call. And there's a possibility that, if the study was done in 71, but we still communicate. We still have these mediums of communication. Now, that doesn't mean you can't get information out of a textbook, or I can't read a news article in a newspaper and glean information from that strictly by reading text. But in the business world, a lot of what we interact with and communicate with is not just about communicating facts. There's a lot of feeling, emotion, opinion, other things that are in there that change the dynamic. And understanding somebody's body language and seeing it is a piece of the pie.
How do you start a program for emotional intelligence in an organization?
Well, I'd look at how it fits into your overall training, and it's not just about taking an assessment and saying, okay, great, and then putting it on the shelf. I think what you do is you look at where you want to go, what you're trying to do within the organization. Are there, where do you see the pain points? What's working great in an organization? I mean, so you might have some things that are just working excellent and key off of those. But I'd really go into it and say, what is it that you want to accomplish? And then look at all the tools and resources that are available to you and and which ones that you then believe will make the biggest impact on you and your team.
Are there any other resources you would recommend for leadership development?
Yeah, I use a resource a lot with clients, and it comes out of Korn Ferry. So they're a very large human capital development company all over the world, and it's called For Your Improvement, FYI. And I've got I think the 5th or 6th version of it, but I can't remember. But there's like 67 leadership competencies identified within that document, and so within there, they'll for example, delegating is a leadership skill that we need to develop. Everybody needs to have some. If you're in a leadership role, you need to delegate to people. So if you look at delegate in the FYI, it tells you somebody that's strong in delegation, somebody that's weak in delegation. Here's some things you can do to get better at delegation, and then it gives you a list of resources, Harvard Business Review articles, books, other things that you can do to read and educate yourself on what delegating is and how to strengthen that leadership set. Again, there's 67 of these leadership competencies identified in there, and they're just great to use and to help you in the plan. And again, I use those when I put these leadership development plans together with people. I'll use these competencies that come out of the For Your Improvement, EQ, and then some other resources, and put together a robust plan for moving people forward.
Great. I would like to once again thank Calvin for joining us today and leading us in this discussion. It is important to consider emotional intelligence as we make plans to move into 2017. And speaking of 2017, don't forget to join us for our next installment of the Lab Leaders webinar series on January 4th, 2017, where we will discuss a New Year's resolution, become a better antibiotic steward. Visit lableaders.com for more information. Thank you.
Thank you.